Well, welcome to our ongoing webinar series on coping with COVID. I'm Dr. Wendy Smeltzer, National Medical Director for Wello and Medical Director for INLIV, our Calgary clinic. So it's my pleasure today to bring back our dietitian, Kellyanne Erdman, and our fitness manager, Jamie Wilkins, for today's webinar. So we're now over a month into this new reality of staying home, working from home, our children not going to schools. We're social distancing and many of us in self-isolation. And the early days of not knowing how this new way of living would look are over, because now we're well into this. So looking after our health at this time is becoming more important than ever before. So not only do we need to adopt new ways for maintaining our fitness levels, but we also need to deal with the challenge of keeping good nutrition going and not resorting to those comfort foods during these stressful times. So today we have two experts who are here to share their knowledge and their tips for the best way to handle both of these challenges. So our first speaker is Kellyanne Erdman, and Kellyanne is a registered dietitian with over 25 years experience in helping people with therapeutic and proactive nutrition, as well as working with people who need weight control, who have eating disorders, many of the aspects of nutrition. Kellyanne also specializes in sport nutrition, and she consults for the Canadian Sport Institute and works with several national sport teams. She always provides such solid and practical nutritional advice. So we're all looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today, Kellyanne.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smeltzer. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. Today, I wanted to discuss nutrition strategies for coping with COVID. What does COVID-19 virus mean to you? For many of us, there's the physical isolation piece, more time alone, more time with family or children and friends. For some, there's fear of getting sick. What about job security? What about the economy? And we're all learning different ways to conduct business, including a webinar like this, and our communication skills, learning of different ways to adapt. For some of you might find that working with the COVID scenario, there's fewer distractions. You're maybe more productive, getting a lot more work done. Whereas others might find there's greater distractions, especially if there's young ones in your household requiring some extra attention. Certainly for all of us, less time commuting, that's for sure. How has COVID affected you? Has it increased your stress levels? And of course, that can mean many things from a nutritional perspective. How about changes with your activities? Not able to get to the gym? Are you working longer hours? Do you take breaks? And what about your metabolism, referred to as resting metabolic rate, RMR? If you've been tracking usually your number of steps taken in a day, you might find that with COVID, you're taking way fewer daily steps. But then some of you might be out there and getting in extra walks, and the dog is getting a real workout. So again, further, are you spending more time on your own, with family? How many of you are actually eating better? More homemade meals, fewer purchase meals, less food temptations that might normally be out in the office. Well, we're all unique when it comes to how COVID-19 is affecting you and your work, your lifestyle, and your health. Personally, I was first impacted by COVID back in early March. I was scheduled to go work with an oil and gas company in Fort McMurray. Early March, they said, we're going to postpone this work. And I thought, well, that certainly is a drastic measure. Little did we know how things would change. Let's look specifically for nutrition strategies. Things that we can control and things that are out of our control. So on this next slide, I'm just going to present a variety of these topics, and then we'll go into more in detail on each of these. What can we control? Well, there's factors, of course, to build a strong immune system, so we have a good defense to prevent getting sick. We certainly can control our food selection, our meals, our snack routine, hydration, homemade meals. But what can be out of our control? certain limitations that are forced upon us around physical isolation and not being able to get together with others and so on. When things in our life, the economy, job situation, health, and so on, are out of our control, it's important to look at how else can I cope besides reaching for food when I'm faced with these challenges. So on this next slide, let's look in depthly to each of these points. First of all, when it comes to food selection, this is probably one of the most important times in our life to make quality food choices. And that means when we look at our food on the plate, just like on the screen, we're seeing these bright colors, antioxidant rich fruits and vegetables. The quality of what we eat enhances our quality of life and just gives us a fighting chance to be emotionally and physically healthy. And that means, well, how am I going to select my foods? And what about the food safety? Many people are concerned, and I'm hearing frequent questions on this topic. Are you buying the foods for yourself, or are you purchasing online food orders? Either way, what we know about this virus is that it lives on hard surfaces for about 48 hours, and it's transmitted from germs of people when they're coughing and they're sneezing. The challenge is when we're buying our foods, if we're buying foods in bulk, well, we just don't know who's last touched the food that you're reaching for. So that being said, in terms of a food safety perspective, probably best to buy as many foods as you can that are prepackaged, like the bag of apples, the salad that's in the plastic bin, rather than buying items that are in bulk, just for safety. More so, you could even consider some frozen produce, like frozen berries and frozen vegetables. Of course, cooking will destroy the virus. If you do end up bringing some foods home that are in bulk, what we can do is wash these foods. In my hand, I have an orange. I would take this, if I bought it in bulk, wash it in the sink with hot soapy water and wipe it down. I would do the same if I was going to have a melon or any other food that I might be consuming, just to give it a wash. And that's particularly important for foods like our canned produce or canned items. Regardless of COVID, we should always wash the tops of all of our canned foods before we open them. Often you hear the advice that we should eat balanced meals. Well, what does a balanced meal look like? Ideally, that's a protein source in each meal, whether you follow a mixed omnivore diet or whether you're vegetarian. That protein, meat, fish, poultry, eggs, that could be some tofu. But ideally in each meal, protein is of course really important for our immune system. With each of our meals, we want to have, again, those bright colored vegetables and fruits. For some of you, just simply eating 3 meals a day may suffice, and others might like to incorporate snacks. It's really individual and what's the best for you. A third element, though, in balancing our meals would be incorporating some kind of whole grain. Now, depending on your energy expenditure and your workouts that you're getting in, you decide how much of that whole grain, starchy carbohydrate do I need. Again, is it 3 meals a day, or are you better off to have meals and snacks? I'll spend some more time on this in a few moments. Either way, whatever you choose to have, I would like to advise, portion that meal, portion your snack, have a designated eating location away from your working station. Sit down and enjoy what you're eating. Psychologically, you may find you're satisfied with less because you're acknowledging mentally, emotionally, what you're consuming. Honestly, even if it's eating carrots while you're working at the computer, it's just really creating a bad habit of associating food and other distractions. So what about family meals? Let's look at this COVID-19 opportunity as a time to have more sit-down family meals. Get the family involved with not only selection of foods, but preparation of meals. Hey, why not be adventurous and look for some new recipes out there? The internet's amazing with lists of different opportunities, options, just to enhance the variety of your nutritional repertoire. Hydration is a very key piece when it comes to nutritional management, especially when we're working in isolation. Do you remember to get up and to get some fluid? I'm not just talking coffee and tea, but water is a critical piece. Are you drinking enough water in the day? Speaking of caffeine, coffee and tea and other caffeinated beverages, well, the half-life for caffeine is 4 to 6 hours. So if you're having a hard time sleeping, you may be advised to stop your caffeine consumption by about 1 or 2 p.m. because that half-life means it stays in your system and can keep you stimulated for 4 to 6 hours. What about alcohol? We're now hearing alarming increases in alcohol sales and assumed consumption. Well, certainly alcohol may have some healthful properties when we talk about red wine, but it is a depressant. And it can prevent getting into that deep REM, rapid eye movement sleep. What about supplements? How can we look at particular key nutrients to boost our immune system? The greatest evidence on supplements and health and immunity really are with vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, and probiotics. Vitamin C has been shown to decrease the duration and severity of symptoms associated with viruses like the common cold. Vitamin D, of course, critical in our immune cell production. Zinc is a trace mineral that we only want to supplement this maximum 30 milligrams a day, only during times if you're feeling symptoms, that sore throat, and so on. Zinc, as a trace mineral, can cause interference of absorption of other key nutrients like iron. So zinc in small quantity, especially as a zinc lozenge, would be an ideal choice to have. Probiotics. Well, 70% of our immune cells are said to originate from the gut. So probiotics, whether that's naturally occurring in foods like yogurts or through the supplement. With a supplement, we would typically aim for a probiotic that has about a 5 to 10 billion live cell count. And then there's glutamine. Glutamine is a non-essential amino acid. It usually comes in a powder, and we actually have athletes taking glutamine on travel days or competition days as a way to boost the immune system. So this is a non-essential amino acid. In other words, our body makes it from other amino acids that we consume. But what's interesting about glutamine, it's actually a fuel that's used by our immune cells. So taking 5 grams a day on days when you feel that sore throat or just trying to give your immune system a boost can be a very good strategy. And as with other amino acids, if your body doesn't need it, well, that just means expensive urine. 5 grams isn't a lot to take. And finally, I'd like to conclude with some points here on being mindful about our nutrition. And many people are reaching out these days and wondering about, how do I manage food cravings when food is so readily available now that I'm working from home? Well, what strategies that we can implement would be tracking your intake, to write down when in the day are you eating, when are you drinking. The time of day is a pretty important piece. Although the evidence isn't super solid on intermittent fasting, what we can learn from that strategy is it wouldn't hurt if we stopped eating for about 12 to 14 hours to have that overnight fast. So try to eat more earlier in the day, as opposed to skimping on breakfast and lunch and then starting to consume a lot of calories, say 4 p.m. onwards. It's much better to eat more earlier in the day. So when we record our intake, we also want to look at exactly, what am I consuming? What are the condiments added to the foods? What am I doing for fluids? And then again, where are you eating? As well as, why are you eating? Are you really responding to hunger and satiety cues? Or are you using food, as we call it, to self-medicate? We're going through rough times right now, and food can elicit a response to make us feel better. But again, if it's not a hunger need, you won't know when to stop because it wasn't hunger that triggered that in the first place. And finally, I'm going to conclude with some real specific tips on the mindful eating. Can you pre-plan your meals and snacks? Then you visualize your success for the next day. If you pre-plan on, let's say today is Tuesday, and then implement that for Wednesday. How about be the slowest eater? Try to put your utensil down between bites. Really taste, savor, and enjoy what you're eating. Plates are a much better visual than bowls. You'll notice if you have pasta in a bowl, it doesn't look like much. So your brain says, have some more. But if we put it on a plate, especially a smaller salad-sized plate, then your brain thinks, look how much I'm eating. How about keeping some of those tempting foods out of sight means out of mind, so that we're not succumbing to the seafood diet. Had I not seen it, I wouldn't have had that urge to eat that food. And then finally, before reaching to have more of whatever food you choose, look at your watch, give yourself 20 minutes, and then decide at 20 minutes, if you're still hungry, have that second serving. But maybe we just need to slow it down, taste and savor, and really let our brain tell us, and our hunger cues, our satiety cues tell us that we've had enough to eat. Well, I enjoy looking forward to your questions after Jamie is about to speak. And I guess we'll have all our questions at the end. Looking forward to specifics from you. Thanks for your attention.
Well, thanks so much, Kellyanne. Always great information, great advice, and really appreciate your excellent information. So we're going to move right into having Jamie Wilkins, our fitness manager, give some information on fitness. And then what I'd encourage you to do, if you have questions, not in the Q&A, but put them through the chat icon of the webinar, and we'll gladly take these to our panelists at the end and get your questions answered. So I'd like to introduce Jamie Wilkins now. Jamie's our fitness manager in our multidisciplinary clinic here in Calgary. He has a bachelor's in kinesiology degree, and then he went on to do a certification in exercise physiology. After several years working in a rehabilitation and exercise therapy setting, he joined our clinic, where he has been our fitness manager, overseeing all of our fitness programs, and he implemented a movement medicine program in addition to the other programs we offer. Jamie is passionate about fitness and helping clients achieve their best care through an integrative healthcare approach. So Jamie, over to you. We look forward to your information.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smeltzer. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I am Jamie Wilkins. I'm here to speak on fitness strategies and how physical activity can help us cope with COVID-19. We're going to start by going over the benefits of exercise and physical activity at a fairly high level, since these are all fairly well known to us, but more specifically, why are these benefits so important to us now while the majority of us are at home and experiencing a major change to our routine? From there, we'll focus on three topics. We'll get into cardiovascular health. We'll talk about muscular strength and endurance. And finally, one of the more important topics I'll talk about today is our physical mobility, our joint mobility and our joint health. As we touch on each of these topics, I'll provide you with the minimum requirements for adults, explain a few of the principles, as well as give you strategies for implementing a plan for each of them. So let's get started with the well-known benefits of physical activity and exercise. So we're going to actually touch on the physical benefits first. Number one, not only reducing the risk of, but managing some serious health conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, and a few others. In times like this, where health is very much on our minds, we want to be certain we're being proactive in reducing our risk to any other health concerns. Second, building and maintaining our strength and endurance and mobility. This is all about having a healthy, strong, and durable body so that we can continue to do the things that we love to do for longer. Here we're talking specifically about longevity. We want to make sure that we come out of this with capable, competent bodies while managing and reducing the risk of tension that we're feeling throughout our bodies, and then limiting the amount of pain that we're feeling because of a lack of mobility or a weakness or an imbalance somewhere in our body. Third, probably the most relevant point on physical benefits right now is that exercise helps boost your immune system. It makes us stronger, more resilient to infection. On to mental benefits. Now, I always feel, and I say this every time, that for every physical benefit, there's 2 or 3 mental benefits of physical activity and exercise. Number 1, reducing stress. During and after exercise, our body releases chemicals into our body and brain to help boost mood while reducing stress. So if you're feeling stress, if you're feeling anxiety, depression, physical activity at any level is a first step towards addressing that. Now, it goes without saying that we have to give ourselves some understanding and a little bit of forgiveness if we're not feeling up to a big change in routine. So while we're going through these strategies, just think, what are some small things that I can implement into my daily routine so I can start making incremental changes, and you don't need to uproot all of your routine and change everything all at once. Number 2, Kellyanne alluded to this, but improving your sleep is very important. We know that sleep is a crucial factor when considering our overall health. Better sleep leads to better functioning body and mind and a reduced risk of illness. Third, a sense of control and achievement. It's really easy for us to feel a lack of control and feel a little bit helpless while staying at home. Making a commitment to focus on your health is one of the best ways to take back some of that control. Sticking to a plan and routine gives you that sense of accomplishment each day, and consistency will begin to yield results that will keep you motivated. So as we move on to the next few slides, I really want everyone thinking about how these strategies can be applied to your lives and your routines. The recommendations to the next 3 slides are made from the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology, Canadian Heart and Stroke Foundation, and the Mayo Clinic. So we're going to start with cardiovascular health. And when we're talking about cardiovascular health, we're talking about all activities to get your heart and your lungs pumping. So why is aerobic activity so important? We're talking about how effectively your lungs and your blood and your heart and your muscles are able to transport and use oxygen to produce energy. So it's your lungs' ability to absorb the oxygen, your blood's ability to transport that to your heart's ability to pump that blood back out to your muscles' ability to uptake that oxygen and use it for any activity that you can really speak of. Higher efficiencies in these processes allow us to work harder for longer with more efficiency. So less stress on our systems. Less stress on our systems, on our heart and on our lungs, helps reduce the risk of heart disease and other acute or chronic issues that we may face down the road. So what I'm going to do is, after I run through moderate and vigorous activity, I'll show you the relationship between the two in regards to time and caloric expenditure. So how many calories can we burn versus moderate versus vigorous activity. So just reading through this slide in brief, first, adults require a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate aerobic activity and 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity each week. So first, what is the difference between the two? How do we define these, since heart rate ranges need to be individualized? So Sean, if you could bring the camera on to me, I'd like to kind of go through just a bit of an exercise with everybody. If you guys are listening, that's great. If you guys are watching, that might help even a little bit more. What we're looking at here is we're going to talk first about moderate activity. Moderate is defined as anything that gets your heart rate up to 50 to 70% of your heart rate max. Now, what is my heart rate max and how do you find that? So there's a really simple solution or equation that you can use. So I'll use this as an example here. I'm going to make sure that you guys can see this. I'm going to pull this up. Finding your predicted heart rate max is super easy. We're going to take an equation of 220 minus your age. In this case, let's take a 45-year-old adult. 220 minus 45 gives us 175. Someone, quick math check on that. So that's 175 beats per minute of your heart. That's your predicted max heart rate. So if we're saying moderate activity is 50 to 70% of that, what we're really looking at in that range is any activity that will get you between 87 to 122 beats per minute. Just checking to see if you guys can read that. So 87 to 122 beats per minute. Really easy way to tell if we're in that, if we're using a wearable device, it would tell you on your watch, or you could take your pulse. If you don't have access to a wearable device or you don't want to take your pulse, there's a couple easy clues to tell if you're in that range. Number one, your breathing quickens during your activity, but you're not completely out of breath. Number two, you develop a light sweat after, say, about 8 to 10 minutes of that activity. And third, you're able to carry a conversation during the activity, but you're not able to sing. So singing with, like, even singing bad, you wouldn't be able to keep that note. So those three ways, if it's a light walk, we're talking a light jog, easy bike ride, or even in some cases, some resistance training, those are all moderate activities that get our heart rate within that zone. 150 minutes a week, how do we break that down? If we're looking at 150 minutes a week, we could break it to about 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week. Something super manageable, especially if we're talking about going out for a walk 5 times a week for 30 minutes a day. It should be fairly easy for us to carve out a bit of time just to get outside and go for that walk. We're going to go into vigorous activity now. Vigorous activity is defined as anything that gets your heart rate between 70 to 85% of your heart rate max. Using that same equation, we're looking at 122 to 147 beats per minute. So you're not quite at that max heart rate threshold. And again, if you're not there in a place where you can have a portable device or something that reads your heart rate for you, you don't want to take your pulse, how do you tell if you're in the zone? Another 3 points would be, number one, your breathing is deep and rapid. So I'm taking full lungs of air and there's a bit of pace to that. You develop a sweat only after a few minutes of this activity, so anywhere around 5 to 6 minutes. And finally, you can't say more than a few words without pausing for breath. So in this case, it would be really difficult for you to carry on a steady conversation, let alone sing. But you could get a couple of words out here and there, but you need to be focusing on your rhythm of your breath. Activities that are included in the vigorous theme here would be a bike ride with some intention. I always use the word intention because if my intention is just to go for a Sunday cruise through the neighborhood, I'm likely not hitting my threshold for vigorous activity with my heart rate. Bike ride with some intention, put the gears up, find a path with nobody on it, and go. Just book it. Running, dancing, soccer in the backyard with your kids, even circuit-style training will get you to those minutes. We're talking 75 minutes a week. If we want to break that down to about 15 minutes, you're looking at 15 minutes, 5 days over the week. You can, of course, increase the volume, meaning the time that you're doing that for. So if you went for 25 minutes, you're looking at roughly 3 days a week that you're in that vigorous zone for 25 minutes. I will say, beware pushing yourself too hard and too often. If you're short of breath, too short of breath, you can't catch your breath, or if you're in some pain, you can't work out as long as you had planned, your exercise intensity probably isn't higher than your your exercise intensity is probably higher than your current fitness levels allow for. So just back off a bit and start building that intensity gradually. So I have a quick graph here I'd like to show you guys, just in terms of how do we apply this at home in terms of if we're really trying to be efficient, with our time. Can we bring the camera right to me? Perfect. If we're looking at how much time we're taking in our workouts and we're saying, you know, I might only have 30 minutes to work out. I don't have a full hour and a half to get this workout in, and we're doing cardio. One easy way to look at this is the relationship between intensity and volume. Volume, we're gonna identify that as time. Intensity is gonna be our beats per minute. So if I'm working at a very high capacity or intensity, so my heart rate is fairly elevated, say around here, and that's our max. So I'm in that zone of 144. We can't prolong that for very long. Our body's basically shut down. We'll have to quit at some point. So that relationship between intensity and time just looks like this. Now, if I was going to, say, work at a lower intensity for a longer period of time, I can actually hold a lower heart rate for a longer time, right? It makes total sense. But what I'm really trying to get to is if my intention is a caloric expenditure, we see a very similar calorie burn between these two different activities, right? So we have this block here of that long, slow distance. Maybe that's a 5K to 10K run at a slow pace. I'm going to burn X amount of calories in that time. I may be able, depending on how hard I'm working, what my activity is, I may be able to reach that same caloric expenditure with a shorter amount of time. All I need to do is increase that intensity. This also will apply to resistance training when we get there, but it's just something to consider that if time, energy, and access are always the excuses that we get, and the ones that come up is, you know, I don't have time to exercise, I have kids. I don't have energy to exercise, because I have kids. I don't have access to gym equipment. It's just to say there are ways around that if we're talking about time and energy. If you have low energy, go for longer periods of time. If you have low time, go for more intensity. Summing up this slide, we're looking at 30-minute walks 5 times per week. You can look at an elevated heart rate, some kind of exercise, a jog, a bike ride, say 3 times a week for 25 minutes. That would get you your minutes at a base level. That's what you're required to get as an adult. We're going to move now to the fitness strategies for strength and endurance. So physical strength and endurance. Why is this important? It's important to maintain performance in everyday activities, promote bone density, stronger tendons and ligaments, which protects us now from injury right now and then down the road. At the core of it, it keeps us doing the things that we love to do for longer. It makes us more resilient to the unpredicted demands that life will throw at us. I want to define resistance exercises first. Resistance exercises, any load that you can put on your body, be it gravity or some kind of external stimulus like a weight, treading through water, anything like that can be considered resistance if you're pushing against a different stimulus. So I guess the question is, how can we get this done at home? Well, the base requirement for us is that we perform resistance training a minimum of 2 times a week. The good news is that resistance training will actually count towards our moderate and vigorous minutes from the previous slide. And I'll kind of get into that towards the end of the slide. One tip here, training all major muscle groups. If you're only doing 2 workouts per week, we need to be focused on a full body approach. So full body, loading your movements with weight right off the bat is not necessary. Introducing exercises slowly with only body weight is probably the best way to get started. It allows you to safely test out a few different movements and experiment with some things that you like. What works for you based off of your goals, experience, and limitations is exactly how you want to go forward with this. If you have experience lifting weights, by all means, but we really need to focus on what are we capable of right now. It's not necessary that you go out and buy a bench press machine. Let's focus on controlling and mastering our body first. Another point to this, we want to focus on the fundamental movements. What I mean by this is that there are some movements that we need to be confident in before we get fancy and get a little bit cute and start trying different varieties and different loads on that. There's so many exercises to insert when you're thinking about at-home workouts, but it's important to choose ones that you feel comfortable with that still give you a challenge. A great way to build your own workout is to incorporate fundamental movements that give you a great base and that are essential to your fitness. So here's a really easy workout structure that you can design, that you can use to design your own workouts at home. So basically, when I talk about structure, and if we can bring the camera right to me again, we're talking about workout structure. What I mean to say is, if you have a skeleton of a workout without actual exercises put in there yet, the intention of these movements is what I want you guys focused on. So we're going to work through 7 different movements that I want you guys thinking about, is this incorporated in my home routine? Number 1 is going to be the pillar of your exercise program, which is a squat. So you guys can see me doing squats here. It's any vertical force you can push through your legs. It's working on back, hip, knee, ankle health, everything. So number 1 is some kind of vertical force into a piston. Number 2 is a hip hinge or a bend of some kind. You're working the posterior chain now, where the focus is on your hamstrings, your low back, your shoulders, in a pulling motion up. So it's that hip hinge down and back. Number 3 is a split stance of some kind. So if I was to back up in any split stance, I'm working on balance in a single leg posture. I'm in a split stance here. I'm putting my weight through one leg. I'm working on balance. I can lunge forward, back, or to the side. Those all count. So if your program incorporates something like that, that's perfect. Talking about the upper body, you need something that is an upper body push, whether it's in an upward direction, downward vector, or forwards, something that gets you pushing. Next is something that gets you pulling. Again, in whatever vector that you're pulling in, up, down, forward, something that works on those back muscles to help you pull. Getting into the core, we need to start thinking about core strength and stability a little bit differently. I want us to all try to say, okay, well, I have an ab exercise, I like crunches. Well, our core doesn't necessarily only include our abdominals. If I'm talking about core, I'm talking about all muscles at the base of my rib cage here, around all the way to include everything from my glutes and all the muscles that attach to my pelvis. So that is our core control. And doing crunches in one motion like this isn't going to help us get stronger there. So what I'm trying to say is, instead of crunches, we're going to work on core stability. We're going to go into planking. So if I'm down onto the floor, you can either be planking onto your hands, onto your elbows, but anything where you're feeling like you're able to brace on that core. And the final one is some kind of rotational stability. So while we're bracing, that's great, but we want to be able to safely move our body through a range of motion, whether it's sitting down, standing up, we're working through a rotation. Think of all you golfers out there. If we're able to speed that ball up, but we're not able to slow down the club, what's getting pulled? Probably everything. So it's that control we have through our motion that allows us to do things that we want for longer, even without injury. Thanks for sticking with me there, guys. All right. All right, variety. Now, I did mention that you want to get the fundamentals, so this might sound counterproductive, but what I mean by variety is key to keeping you engaged. I mean, there's a million ways for you to get from A to B. Finding a routine that makes you feel good, that gives you a challenge, is the best way that's going to help you stick to something. If you feel good doing something, it's fun, you're more likely to stick to it. So my recommendation, try a couple different things. You could do body weight workouts, you can go swimming, you could do yoga, Pilates, whatever it is. Those are all resistance type exercises. But try something, do something that makes you feel good so you'll be able to stick to it longer. I'll add 2 points to this as well. Be patient with your progress. Results come slowly, so it's the consistency that matters. It's the compound effect of all of your efforts over time. Don't expect to see progress after 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Let's count it over 3 months. Let's look at 3 months. Let's set a goal. I'm going to be consistent first. I'm not going to worry about my results. I want to stick to consistency. 3 months, I'm going to check in. 6 months, I'm going to check in. And I promise you, if you guys are being consistent, you're following Kellyanne's advice on the seafood diet, and you're actually being consistent, I guarantee you're going to have some kind of forward progress there. Second point I'll add is, depending on the duration and intensity of your resistance workout, those minutes can be counted towards your vigorous and moderate activity levels from the previous slide. Just bringing you right back to our cute little graph here. If this is HIIT training being high intensity interval training, and this is just, your 60-minute lift. If we're looking at time, and you guys really want to work on HIIT training, then if it's lower time, it's roughly anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. The best way to get our workouts in, to have those minutes count towards our cardio minutes, is to work on a work-rest ratio. And the best way to go is, if we're using that stack of squats, pushing, pulling that I just led us through, the best thing to do is to do those in a succession with a work-rest ratio of 2 to 1. So really what this means is, if I'm going to work for 1 minute, I'm going to rest for 30 seconds. If I'm going to work for 20 seconds, I'm going to rest for 10 seconds. You're going to perform one exercise after the other in succession for a work rest of 20 to 10. That way you're working at a high intensity, and then you're giving yourself enough rest just to recover to hit the next set. You maybe do 8 to 10 rounds of those 7 exercises, slotting in whichever exercises you want, but that structure is still sound. That'll get you to that same caloric expenditure. It also kind of shortens on that time. Just this slide in review, let's get 2 resistance training exercises per week. Find something that works for you. Get yourselves moving twice a week. We're going to move now to the final slide for myself. Something I'm super passionate about is physical mobility, and we need to define that first and what the difference is between mobility and flexibility. So first, flexibility. Flexibility is the muscle's ability to lengthen and return to its original state with no consideration of control. Mobility is exactly that. It's the muscle's ability to move through a range of motion with articular strength, control, and coordination. Mobility includes not just the structure of the joint and soft tissue, but incorporates our nervous system as well. If we're thinking only flexibility, and I was to sit here, reach for my toes for about, I don't know, maybe I hold it for a minute or two, I probably feel pretty good for the next 20 minutes. But the problem is that those results are not long lasting. Now, it's important that if you feel good doing passive flexibility, meaning just getting that stretch, by all means, please do it. But understand that those long-term effects don't come in until you start gaining strength and then articular control through that range of motion. So mobility training is a great way to restore your body's natural functions, reduce and manage pain and tension throughout the body. Our bodies adapt to the stimulus as we put on them. Give it, physical therapy, our training schedule, or a daily movement pattern. All of these have an impact on how we move and how our body feels every day. So from here, let's bring the camera once again back onto me. I'm going to lead you through something. I'm just going to talk about sitting. And I have a vendetta against sitting, I understand that, but I'm going to explain to you guys why. Because, for example, when we're consistently sitting, us in a modern society, we have a habit of living in a flex position. And what I mean by flex is, let me just pull a chair up here. What I mean by this is we live here. Okay, we wake up, we have our breakfast, we maybe read the paper if you still read a paper, or the internet, whatever you're reading. We might, drive to work, drive to get groceries. We have our phone in front of us. We watch TV. We sit down quite often. Imagine if I was just in a 10-hour car ride. What ends up happening when I get up is I get out of the car and I go, oh, and I got to stretch everything out. That's a good example of our body adapting to a stimulus or lack of stimulus that we're putting on it. So what ends up happening when I'm sitting is I want to use the term short. Your muscles are not actually short, they're just not mobile. They're not used to a range of motion. So what happens is I'm shortening my hip flexor muscles. I'm actually shortening my pecs, my chin might go forward, so I'm getting a little bit tight in my neck. So what happens when I stand up is I get that same posture. So I would stand like this, but I'm not going to walk around like this all day. That's ridiculous. So what I do is I compensate. I try to lift my chest. So what happens is my hips start spilling forward because I have the tight muscles here. I develop tight muscles in my low back and my chest. So now I'm in a compensated posture that is very hard to kind of get out of if we don't put some kind of external stimulus on it, like mobility training. For you visual learners, what that looks like is I got my boys here. I got Tom and Tim. Okay, Tom feels great. Tom's got no back pain. He feels good. He does his mobility routines quite often. Let's give Tom a smile. He's happy. That's good. Tim's not so happy. Tim doesn't do mobility routines. He sits quite often. He's having quite a bit of low back pain. You can see the difference in just the pelvic orientation here. Essentially what I'm trying to show you is that that's his tight hip flexor muscle. These are his tight back muscles. He's going to have a tight pec right here. He might even have some tightness up and down his neck. So all of these problems are causing issues on the other side. It's called reciprocal inhibition. I don't expect you guys to remember that. But if I'm tight here, it's likely that I'm weak on this side. If I'm tight here, it's likely that I'm weak on this side. So when we talk about the specifics of how do we address this stuff and how do we start addressing these sit muscles that, we're constantly in a flex position and we're feeling pain and it's taking us away from all the activities we want, what do we need to do? So the answer is we need to be adding stimulus through mobility training to correct these compensations. How do we do that? We first need to be conscious of how we're moving or not moving. The way we're walking, the way we're sitting, standing, all of these patterns affect our mobility. If it sounds exhausting, it definitely is because you're thinking about it all the time. But just like anything with practice, you get a lot better at it. You start to learn, where are my shoulders? If I'm sitting right now, and in fact, if you guys take a body check of where you're sitting right now, it's likely that we're a little bit tilted back in our pelvis, that we're a little bit slumped. I want you guys to sit your butt all the way back in your chair so you can feel that low back again. I want you to sit up nice and tall, roll those hips forward and pull the shoulders back. Okay, that's a good sit posture. Now it's insane to say let's hold that posture forever because that actually causes problems as well. You're allowed to move, but just keeping those body checks in mind of how am I walking, how am I standing, how am I sitting is one of the first steps. Number two is we want to work actively through a range of motion. I mentioned the difference between flexibility and mobility. We don't want to do passive stretching. I don't want to throw my leg up or my arm up and just let my muscle start releasing because I don't gain any control in that. And my hypermobility people that have that full range of motion, this applies to you as well, because if I have that range of motion, but if I ever get in a compromised position and I don't have the strength to pull myself out of that with control, there's an injury down the road. If I don't have the mobility to get in that position, you might say, like, why would I ever need to reach back behind me like that? Well, I mean, the ski mogul doesn't really care what you're able to do when you crash into it, or the vehicle that's coming and colliding. Those things are unpredictable. So we're trying to get our body ready to take those different stimulus that life gives us. So working actively through range of motion is key for every joint and every day. If passive stretching, again, it feels good and gives you some relief, by all means do it. But lasting change lasting change does not come without mobility. So taking your movements through a full range of motion, especially in your resistance exercises, is key. When performing the movements, explore the range of motion of your joints without pushing it to the point of pain. Adding the articular control and strength and coordination, you're introducing longer lasting results with improved function at the joint, at the joint, and reducing your risk of injury. I mentioned doing these daily. The use it or lose it, or move it or lose it principle applies here. If I never explore the ranges of my body, if I never have a need to reach overhead, what I see with my clients is I'll ask them to go thumb up overhead, and normally we'll stop about here. It's probably because over the years, we've learned to not reach up over our head this high. So we're now limited. Our body has changed to that movement pattern. So addressing this daily and with a good mobility routine to explore those ranges of motion so we don't lose those ranges of motion is exactly what I'm talking about. So if I never have the need to squat, bend, twist, reach, push, or pull in those fun ranges, I'll lose access to them. And we see that as, people come to me and they say, well, I can't, my body just doesn't move that way. Well, it's because we've learned to not move that way. We actually haven't explored that. So on that, one of the last points is we want to reduce our sit time. Standing desks are great. I've been standing here this whole time. Stand when you can, get out for walks when you can. Take your mobility routines through a full range of motion. We want to make sure that we're doing resistance training twice a week. And if we're breaking it down, what your week could look like is you have 5 days in the week, in the work week. Let's go out for a 30-minute walk in those 5 days. Let's do 30 to 45 minutes of body weight exercises. And if you guys start adding weight and you start working on HIIT training, high intensity interval training, those times will shorten and you can count those minutes towards the cardio minutes. Wake up and do your mobility routines in the morning. I find that is the best because it helps wake you up. It's a good meditation practice. It's a good mindfulness practice to see where you're feeling a little bit tension and where you need to focus. Anytime if you're working and you're feeling some tension, like pull out a mobility routine and work through it. So everybody that tuned in today to listen to myself and our team will be receiving a daily mobility routine that I've built. It's fairly general and it's fairly low impact, but it is something that I'd like you guys to apply first thing in the morning. Wake up, I believe it's 10 exercises. And when you guys start working through that, just remember the intention is to explore the range of motion and get your body awake and moving a little bit. Just like Kellyanne, I'll be here to answer questions right at the end of this. So I'm going to pass it right back to Dr. Smeltzer. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. As always, a passionate, informative presentation. So I really appreciate that. So what we'd like to do is just move to some of the questions. We've got some for both of our presenters today, and many of you have set them in ahead of time, and we've got many questions that have come in through the chat function. So we'll try to get to as many as we can. So first one for you, Kellyanne, regarding supplements. If somebody is taking zinc on a daily basis, how many milligrams would you suggest? And do you think all of the supplements you suggested should be taken with food?
Yeah, great question. With the zinc, I would not take it every single day. It's one of the micronutrients where the maximal daily amount is very low at 30 milligrams a day. So ideally, we would just take the zinc at times when we need that immune booster, but not on a daily basis. And especially, it is a mineral, and minerals can be very hard on the stomach. So we should take our vitamins and minerals with food first. Have food in your tummy before you take them.
Great. Another one for you, Kellyanne. What is the best food to eat during this time for vegetarians?
So for vegetarians, we'd really want to look at some good quality proteins. Of course, there's different types of vegetarians. If someone is a vegan, then they wouldn't have any animal products whatsoever, and using therefore a lot of their proteins from legumes, as well as nuts and seeds, and then of course tofu and other soy products. So that's a concern. We want to make sure we're eating often as a vegetarian and incorporating healthy fats. Of course, mono and polyunsaturated fats would be the choices there. But yeah, that's what I would look at with a vegetarian way of eating, is just making sure you're getting enough, particularly protein, and then also iron-rich foods and a great source of vitamin B12 as well.
Great, thanks, Kellyanne. For Jamie, this I think is coming from many people. Right now I'm struggling. What are some strategies to maintain motivation?
Yeah, it is definitely tough too. I got this question too, is if you don't like working out just for the sake of working out, what are some things to help me along and get motivation? And I'll say that we want to think about exercise as physical activity, as healthy living. It doesn't need to be in a gym setting. You don't need to be drenched in sweat in your living room doing things that are super foreign to you. I think, as I mentioned, variety, like go out and do things that are very, very fun for you. Like go for a walk, go for a bike ride, go do the stairs. There's different ways to get your heart rate up that isn't just, doing bicep curls in your living room. That's completely unnecessary. So the answer is to stay motivated, do stuff that you enjoy doing, and then start introducing a few different things, like do a little bit of research on what exactly you can do if you have any physical limitations. I've seen someone had a rotator cuff, so there's lots that you can find on the internet as far as what you're able to do. But my best answer is just to say, find things that actually do, that you enjoy doing, instead of, thinking that exercise is just this box.
Great. Kellyanne, I struggle with binge eating and being home all day with the kitchen only a few feet away. How do I stop from checking that fridge throughout the day?
Well, that's a really common concern, and reaching for food to self-medicate to feel better, and again, easy access to it can be very tempting. First of all, I would want to look at, what does that urge to eat represent? And maybe I'm dehydrated. Maybe I haven't got up and stretched like Jamie's outlined. I just want to get up there and stretch right now, Jamie. Maybe I need to get some oxygen delivery to my muscles and it's time to go for a walk. So first things first, what does that urge to eat represent? And if it's something that's out of our control, well, how is eating going to solve that? The economy, for example, right? And then we feel frustrated after the fact. But then let's not make sure we're not sabotaging ourselves either nutritionally. So eating often in the day, I would say start to have a breakfast within 1 or 2 hours of waking, get to that meal, and then for a lot of people after that, eating about every 3 hours, and making sure that your meals are balanced. Is there enough carbohydrate? Do you have the protein, some healthy fat? That gives us the greatest satiety, fullness. So we want to make sure we're incorporating healthy fats in our meals, and tend to find you can get by on fewer calories when there's more balance to it. And then, as I said earlier, Dr. Smeltzer, I would keep some of those tempting foods out of sight, out of mind. And maybe that means give them away, get them out of the house if they're so tempting. Or on the other hand, someone might say, okay, portion, a set amount of your favorite food, tempting food, sit down, enjoy, don't feel guilty about it. You've made the choice, taste and savor. And you might find that you're satisfied with less. So there's no really right or wrong, but it's a matter of what's the best strategy for each person in that case.
Yeah, some good strategies there. Another one, sort of similar along that line, but how important is it tracking macros for weight loss?
Right, so a lot of people are looking at tracking macronutrients. That means the carbohydrate, protein, and fat, the nutrients that we need in the largest quantity in our diet, versus micronutrients would be vitamins and minerals. Dr. Smeltzer, one of the challenges with tracking macros is we're really depending on the accuracy of the database that you're using. And does every apple have the same calories in it? And how is your food prepared? Sometimes people neglect to incorporate all those little extras, those sauces and condiments that can contribute to the overall macros. So I'm conflicted with it. It can be a good strategy for personal accountability as long as it's done properly. And really that means portion what you choose to eat, and then measure that food by mass, by weight, or by volume. Take out some measuring cups, and then make sure you choose the right food when you enter it in the database and how that food was prepared. And by the way, are you using an American database or is it Canadian? In Canada, well, our meats are a lot leaner than American cuts. And so you might actually find that, hey, if it's an American database, my fat intake might be reported to be higher than it actually is. So macros, pros and cons to it for sure.
Excellent. Jamie, one for you. I need more non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and I'm looking for ideas. My current step count average is about 3,000 a day as opposed to the 7,000 when I'm in the office. How to get more steps in working at home?
I would definitely say get outside, weather permitting. We're talked about, how important it is to get outside. It's not just important for your mental health to get outside, like getting those steps in as you're going out for those 30-minute walks 5 times a week. That's the number one thing.
Great. Another one on supplements, Kellyanne. Would magnesium also be useful as a supplement? And if so, what guidelines for the amount?
That's interesting. That's also another mineral like zinc that we really want to be careful and not go overboard on the amount that we're supplementing. Magnesium can work as a natural muscle relaxant. So we often use it with calcium as a great sleep aid at night. So take that an hour before sleeping. The trick with magnesium, if you exceed too much, well, that can cause very loose stools and maybe diarrhea. So the daily maximum for magnesium is said to be 400 milligrams a day. Probably best to stick pretty close to that. But no, magnesium really has its place as a muscle relaxant. Personally, I do that every night, a calcium magnesium before bed, especially if you ever suffer with restless leg syndrome, where those muscles, you're trying to sleep, but those legs are just quivering away. Really resolves that one too.
Excellent. Well, that answered another question that came in about any tips for helping promote a good night's sleep. So I think you answered that one with that as well. There's a question here. Actually, I'll take this one because there's some new information about it. The question is, should I be more than 2 meters apart from others when I run outside? And I know we're all very focused on our social distancing, physical distancing of 2 meters or approximately 6 feet. And I think this is probably in response to a study that came out of just over a week ago with some European researchers that were finding that with the wind created, the wind flows and running, that could some of those droplets actually transfer farther than the usual amount if you're standing side by side. And it's still under investigation. That was in a laboratory wind tunnel setting, but there may be some suggestions that if you're running behind each other, even more than that 2 meters or 6 feet could be recommended. So always better if you're running alone, then there's no risk and not in populated areas. And if you are running together, maybe side by side, 6 feet apart or 2 meters apart would be safe. And there's still up in the air whether that study is something valid. They were suggesting up to 15 feet or doubling the distance roughly when you're going front to back with running. So still more information to come. This is all new and we're learning as we go through, and information will come out, I'm sure, substantiating this in the near future. So that is about, I run out of time, still many questions, but it wraps up our time for today. Thank you both, Kellyanne and Jamie. Great information and great advice and tips for us all going forward. A reminder for everybody that social distancing is important. It's getting tempting with good weather now to gather the way we used to, but we still have measures in place, and we want to make sure everybody observes those public health advisories. Another reminder, we want to share some positivity during these times. So we have created a community at #Wello community. So you can post positive pictures or thoughts that you have and just share with others so we can all share some positivity and get through these times together. So thank you everyone for participating today. Thank you to our speakers. Stay healthy and safe. And we hope to see you next week when we'll be addressing some of the mental health issues with COVID-19. Thanks very much. Bye.